Welcome to this edition of Leap Q&A, and with me I have Dr. John Eliastam, who's also the head of operations at Leap. Now, John holds a PhD in philosophy as well as an MA in organizational leadership. Welcome, John.
Hi, Denver. Good to be with you and good to be chatting to you today.
Great to have you. How long have you been working with SMEs and why SMEs?
I've been working with SMEs for around about 14 years, and I've worked with them because I have an involvement with non-profit organizations and community work that predates that. And I reached the conclusion working in communities that one of the best ways of helping communities, especially poorer communities, was by helping the capacity of small businesses within those communities and allowing them to become role models and engines for growth within those communities. So that was what got me started. It was something that was a passion more than there was some kind of a commercial case for me being involved with small businesses.
Corporate South Africa spends upwards of 35 billion rand on enterprise and supply development to help black-owned SMEs. My question is, with so much effort and so much money going into it, why are we still plagued with this business failure rate calculated at probably about 80% within the first 5 years? What's going on?
If I look at it from the human perspective, my experience is that probably around 80% of these entrepreneurs are what we might call reluctant entrepreneurs. They've become entrepreneurs out of necessity. They've lost their jobs or there are no jobs available. And there's a huge debate about whether entrepreneurs are born or made. Certainly some people seem to be born entrepreneurs. But I think we're failing to bridge the gap in terms of supporting these entrepreneurs in their development as entrepreneurs. And a lot of business development seems to focus on simply bringing businesses into the supply chain for a limited period of time with a certain amount of support, but that doesn't really help the entrepreneur make the psychological journey that needs to be made to be able to think like an entrepreneur and function like an entrepreneur and understand value creation, to be able to be aware of the problems that his client or customer is facing and innovate to solve those problems. Those aren't things that come naturally. And so I think what happens is that businesses come into these supportive programs or atmospheres for a period of time, and then when that contract or that period ends, they tend to drop out of it and are very often dependent on one client or one customer. And what we're not really doing is building sustainable businesses that are solving problems in a way that really creates value and captures it.
These business development service providers, do they know or are they aware of the culture and the dynamics that they're working in?
You'd assume that they would, you'd think that they would, but the evidence does seem to say no, that the focus seems to be on program delivery. I think one of my perceptions is that a lot of ESD is done to beneficiaries or for beneficiaries rather than with beneficiaries. So there's a power dynamic which for me is problematic in transformation, that as long as the person who is, I suppose, the beneficiary of the transformation process is in a position of power under, I think we fail to achieve real empowerment, which is to build a partnership where perhaps the needs and concerns of the beneficiary are taken into account in a much more meaningful way rather than simply a focus on compliance, a need to spend, a need to get points on the scorecard.
So what would you say is the biggest obstacle we have in dealing with helping SMEs become financially sustainable and accelerate them?
I think it's their dependence on a single client. Most of them have a relationship with one large client, and most, if not all, of their revenue comes from their business relationship with that client. That relationship is governed by a contract which might run for a year or 3 years or 5 years, and very often the client then moves on to support other beneficiaries. The SME is exited from the client's ESD program, but no real effort is made to help them make that transition.
I mean, it's a big problem. A lot of money is going into it, a lot of effort is going into it. How do we fix this?
If we could have a longer term, more relational process with our beneficiaries where we walk a journey with them over many years, but in a relationship of genuine partnership, I think that within that kind of context, we're going to co-create and discover new solutions And I think that's what we're trying to do at Leap, is to shift the kind of work we're doing much closer to a partnership relationship, both with our client in terms of understanding their needs and what they need to achieve, but also really building a relationship with our beneficiary where we want to try and come into their world. It involves things like empathy, which aren't typically something that you would measure in a business program, but really understanding what are their frustrations, what are their pains, what are their real needs. And in my experience, those are often ignored.
So when we talk about an enterprise and supply development strategy, what are we talking about?
We're really trying to create three results. The first is a result for a client. We want to give them the best possible results on their BE scorecard, particularly in terms of their procurement and their ESD spend. And we want to help them build a robust supply chain. That's important, and that can be integrated into the client's strategy. Then we want to achieve a result for the beneficiary. And for the beneficiary, we want to build their capacity, increase their capabilities, and help them build a growing and sustainable business. But then there's another result which is often ignored, and I think it's when we lose sight of this other result that we're tempted to move to quick fixes with the first two results. And that third result is that we're trying to build a nation. We're trying to shift the needle in terms of economic inequality. We're trying to increase participation in our economy, and we're trying to create sustainable jobs. And as long as we take shortcuts towards the first two results, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to that most important result. And it's easy to lose sight of under the pressure to either build a profitable small business or achieve BE compliance. So our future as businesses depends on building a truly inclusive economy in which people are able to realize their potential, in which they're able to look for opportunities, access those opportunities, build businesses and thrive. To the extent that we do that, we're going to have a successful SME ecosystem, and we're also going to have a thriving economy in terms of the bigger players in it.
You're talking about shortcuts. What do you mean by that?
So your ESD spend is based on your net profit after tax, and it's very often a difficult call to make, especially in uncertain times like the ones we're living in. So companies tend to delay their ESD spend very often up until the last minute, and then there's suddenly a large amount of money that has to be spent in a short amount of time, and the beneficiary equally is under all sorts of financial pressures. So anything that looks like it's going to help them seems like a good idea, but it's not necessarily the best idea. And we're not always thinking about the best possible way to help a beneficiary. Let me give you an example. I'm working with an SME, very much a grassroots SME, and it's been driven by a wonderful young entrepreneur who has great ideas, enormous initiative. This is the first business that he's running, and the client wants to buy a motor vehicle for the beneficiary. The beneficiary doesn't have a driver's license. The beneficiary can't afford to insure the vehicle. He has some exciting plans about growing his business in the environment where he's working through a whole lot of marketing initiatives, but because the client needs to spend the money and buying a car perhaps looks like an attractive or a positive thing to do for the beneficiary, they're intent on doing that. And so there's a mismatch between the actual needs of the beneficiary and the desires of the client, which might be compounded by the pressure on the client to spend the money in a short period of time.
So it's well-meaning though?
Totally well-meaning, absolutely.
And I would imagine that is why it's so important that you have a bespoke program per beneficiary.
Absolutely. There just is no one-size-fits-all. I can understand the appeal that a one-size-fits-all program has for certain companies operating in the ESD space, because if we have a standardized set of training programs and we can just run everyone through them like a sausage machine, it's an incredibly efficient process and it makes us a lot of money. But does it really solve the problems that that entrepreneur has or that SME has? For me, at the end of the day, to see someone succeed and to see someone grow, it's why I get out of bed every morning.
Thank you very much, John. Join us next time again for another edition of Leap Q&A. Please subscribe to our channel and share it. See you next time.